From the misty cliffs of Galicia to the sun-bleached coves of the Mediterranean, the Iberian Peninsula has always been a crossroads. A place where seas carry not just ships, but stories. Along these shores, the wind whispers through ruined hill forts, scattering the same questions that have lingered for centuries. Who were the people we call the Celtic Iberians? Were they migrants from distant lands, carrying their language and traditions across mountains and seas? Or were they children of this soil, who wove foreign ideas into the fabric of their own culture until the strands became inseparable? Archaeologists uncover fragments, a spiral-carved torque, a weathered stone stele, a bronze sword buried beside a warrior. But each find only deepens the mystery. Linguists trace echoes of ancient tongues through place names and inscriptions, while historians pore over the words of Greek and Roman chroniclers who saw Iberia's peoples as both familiar and strange. Yet the truth is not locked in a single moment of arrival, nor in a single people's story. The origins of the Celtic Iberians unfold more like a coastline, jagged, winding, and shaped by countless tides of contact, exchange, and transformation. To walk this shoreline is to move through layers of time, each revealing a different face of Iberia's past. This is a journey into a world where archaeology meets legend, where culture is never static, and where identity is something made and remade across centuries. To understand the Celtic Iberians, we must first understand the stage upon which their story unfolded. A land that is itself an ancient manuscript, written and rewritten over thousands of years. The Iberian Peninsula is not merely a geographical space, it is a palimpsest, each layer of human history faintly visible beneath the next. Long before the first iron swords or curving Latin-style motifs appeared, Iberia had been a meeting place of worlds. In the Mesolithic age, hunter-gatherers roamed river valleys and coasts, their lives tied to seasonal rhythms of fish migrations, wild game, and edible plants. Then came the Neolithic Revolution, a quiet but irreversible transformation. Farming communities, some arriving from the eastern Mediterranean, brought new crops, domesticated animals, and the skills to shape stone into polished axes and clay into sturdy, decorated vessels. By the Bronze Age, the peninsula was humming with metallurgical innovation. In the southwest, cultures like those of El Argar created organized settlements, specialized workshops, and far-reaching trade networks. Bronze tools and weapons traveled along rivers and coasts, linking Iberia to far-off lands. On the Atlantic facade, an entirely different world took shape. One that looked outward to the sea, forging connections with Brittany, the British Isles, and beyond. Here, shared styles of jewelry, weaponry, and burial monuments tell of an Atlantic Bronze Age. A cultural current that flowed not south to north, but in circles around the edge of Europe. This dual identity, Mediterranean to the east, Atlantic to the west, would become one of Iberia's enduring features. In the high plateaus and rugged mountain interiors, communities adapted to isolation, developing distinct local traditions shaped by their environment. These upland regions became crucibles of resilience, where outside influences were filtered and transformed before taking root. When elements we now call Celtic began to appear, a certain style of weapon, a particular pattern of decoration, a new tongue, they entered into a world already richly layered. The people who adopted them were not blank slates awaiting a new identity. They were heirs to millennia of local traditions who blended the new with the old in ways that reflected their landscapes, needs, and ambitions. The Iberian Peninsula, then, was never a passive recipient of cultural change. It was an active participant, absorbing, reshaping, and re-exporting ideas. This truth lies at the heart of the Celtic Iberian mystery. To solve it, we must see Iberia not as an isolated province at the edge of Europe, but as a crossroads, a dynamic meeting ground where cultures collided, cooperated, and coexisted. Before we can follow the trail of the Celtic Iberians, we must first confront a deceptively simple question. What do we mean by Celtic? It is a word heavy with both scholarly precision and romantic imagination, a term that can evoke images of spiral-carved jewelry, fierce warriors, and ancient bards, but which, in reality, is far more complex. For historians and archaeologists, Celtic can mean different things depending on the evidence in hand. The first is linguistic. a group of related languages within the Indo-European family, including modern Irish, Welsh, Breton, and their extinct continental cousins, Gaulish, Lepontic, and Celtiberian among them. In this sense, identifying a people as Celtic depends on whether they spoke a Celtic language. But language leaves only faint traces in the archaeological record, preserved in inscriptions, place names, or the echoes of ancient words still alive in modern dialects. The second sense is archaeological. Here, Celtic refers to material culture, artifacts and design motifs recognized across Iron Age Europe. Distinctive Latin art with its flowing curves and interlacing spirals, the long iron sword with its leaf-shaped blade, elaborate torques of twisted gold or bronze. These are all hallmarks often labeled Celtic, but artifacts can travel farther than the people who make them. A torque found in Iberia might have been made locally, imported, or even copied from a foreign model. In material terms, Celtic can be as much a style as an ethnicity. The third sense is ethnocultural, a category shaped in part by ancient writers. Greek and Roman authors sometimes grouped diverse tribes under the banner of Keltoi or Celte based on perceived similarities in customs, clothing, or martial prowess. In this way, Celtic became an outsider's label, a convenient shorthand that could blur important distinctions. And so, the challenge is clear. Celtic is not a single box into which a people neatly fit, but rather a set of overlapping circles, language, artifacts, and identity that sometimes align and sometimes do not. A community might speak a Celtic language yet produce pottery in a purely local style. Another might adopt Latin-style jewelry but continue speaking a non-Celtic tongue. When we speak of the Celtic Iberians, then, we are not describing a single unified nation, but a spectrum of communities who, to varying degrees, spoke Celtic languages, embraced certain artistic or technological traditions, and were recognized, by themselves or by outsiders, as belonging to a wider Celtic world. The true story lies in the intersections between these circles, and in the ways Iberian peoples blended them into something uniquely their own. When we first meet the Celtic Iberians in the written record, it is through the eyes and biases of outsiders. To the Greek and Roman world, Iberia was a land both alluring and dangerous, a distant edge of the known world, rich in silver, gold, and hardy warriors. But the image we inherit from their texts is shaped by politics, war, and the author's own cultural lenses. Greek writers were among the first to mention Iberia's peoples. Herodotus, in the 5th century BCE, speaks of Keltoi living beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. Though his knowledge is hazy and blends geography with hearsay, later Greek geographers, such as Ephorus, expanded on this, imagining a western fringe of Celtic lands stretching into the peninsula. By the time of the Roman Republic, the picture sharpens. Historians like Polybius and Livy record encounters with tribes the Romans labeled Celtiberi, Galeci, and Celtici. These names tell us two things. First, that the Romans recognized certain Iberian peoples as belonging to the same broad cultural sphere as the Celts of Gaul. Second, that they also saw them as distinctly Iberian, rooted in their own lands and traditions. Strabo, writing in the early 1st century CE, offers one of the most detailed accounts. He describes the peoples of the Northwest, especially the Galeci, as living in small, fortified hilltop settlements, speaking languages akin to those of Gaul, and practicing customs that struck him as rustic yet resilient. He notes their skill in war, their use of spears and shields, and their fierce independence. But Strabo's pen is not entirely neutral. Like many Roman-era authors, he filters his observations through a lens of imperial judgment, contrasting civilized Mediterranean societies with the barbarian fringes. Classical accounts also reveal a fascination with the martial culture of these peoples. Roman sources tell of Celtiberian mercenaries serving in far-off armies, their reputation for endurance and loyalty making them sought-after soldiers. In war, they fought not as scattered raiders, but in disciplined ranks, wielding the gladius hispaniensis, the short sword that impressed the Romans so much they adopted it for their own legions. Yet these ancient voices must be read with caution. They often conflate or misapply ethnic labels, and their descriptions sometimes mix fact with stereotype. The Celtic identity they observed may have been as much a political category as a cultural reality, shaped by the demands of Roman diplomacy and conquest. Even so, these classical testimonies are invaluable. They capture the perception of Celtic Iberia from beyond its borders, a perception of a land at once familiar and foreign, bound to the larger Celtic world yet distinct in its own right. For us, they serve as a bridge between the archaeological record and the lived experiences of the people who once inhabited Iberia's hills, plains, and coasts. Beyond the words of ancient historians and the whispers of legend, the stones and soils of Iberia hold tangible traces of the people who lived there. To understand the Celtic Iberians, we turn to the archaeology that reveals their settlements, their art, and the ways they shaped their landscapes. One of the most striking features across northwest Iberia is the proliferation of castros, fortified hilltop settlements that crown the landscape like ancient sentinels. These stone-built villages, often perched on steep slopes or promontories, were not mere military outposts, but vibrant centers of community life. Their circular or rectangular houses, carefully laid out streets, and imposing defensive walls speak of societies deeply invested in both protection and social cohesion. The Castro culture, flourishing from the late Bronze Age into the Iron Age and beyond, is perhaps the most visible archaeological expression of Celtic Iberian life in regions like Galicia, northern Portugal, and Asturias. These communities were tied to their rugged environment, balancing pastoralism with agriculture and maintaining craft traditions that produced distinctive pottery, tools, and jewelry. Among the artifacts recovered from Castro sites, metalwork stands out. Weapons such as iron swords with leaf-shaped blades and spearheads reflect martial values and technological skills. But more than mere tools of war, the exquisite craftsmanship of torques, bracelets, and fibulae, often decorated with flowing, curvilinear designs reminiscent of Latin art from Central Europe, suggests a shared aesthetic vocabulary reaching far beyond Iberia's borders. Yet these designs were not simple imports. Local artisans reinterpreted and adapted continental motifs, blending them with indigenous styles to create something new, a hybrid art form uniquely Iberian. This fusion highlights the dynamic cultural exchanges that define the region, where ideas traveled as readily as goods, reshaping identities in the process. Moving eastward, the Celtiberian heartland around the upper Ebro Valley reveals a different but related pattern. Here, fortified towns known as oppida arose. Larger, more complex settlements with planned streets, public spaces, and evidence of craft specialization. Archaeological digs at sites like Numantia have uncovered richly layered remains. Thick defensive walls, domestic quarters, workshops, and cemeteries filled with warrior burials. The material culture in Celtiberia mixes Mediterranean influences with Latin-style metalwork and locally produced pottery, reflecting a melting pot of traditions. This region stands out for the quantity and quality of Celtic linguistic inscriptions discovered, suggesting a deep integration of Celtic language and culture. In both the Northwest and Celtiberia, the archaeological record paints a picture of diverse but interconnected communities. Hillforts and oppida were not isolated refuges but hubs within broader networks of trade, warfare, and social alliances. Their material culture, from weapons to jewelry, signals identities that were both local and part of a wider Celtic world. These archaeological signatures help us move beyond ancient labels and legends, grounding the story of the Celtic Iberians in the lived realities of settlement, craft, and community. While swords and jewelry speak through their shapes and designs, language offers a more intimate glimpse into identity. The words people use to name themselves, their gods, and their world. Yet language, unlike objects, leaves few durable traces. In Iberia, the key to unlocking Celtic speech lies carved on bronze, stone, and lead. Inscriptions written in an ancient tongue that scholars call Celtiberian. The discovery of Celtiberian inscriptions in the upper Ebro Valley and surrounding regions provides one of the clearest proofs that Celtic languages were not confined to Central or Western Europe, but firmly rooted in parts of Iberia as well. Written in scripts derived from the indigenous Iberian alphabet, these texts are often short and formulaic, names, dedications, or legal pronouncements, yet they preserve unmistakable linguistic features shared with other Celtic languages. Among the most famous are the Botorrita bronzes, a set of inscribed bronze plaques uncovered near Zaragoza. These texts include complex legal codes and communal declarations, hinting at organized political structures and shared customs. The language they employ shows Celtic grammatical patterns and vocabulary, offering a rare direct voice from the Iron Age. Beyond Celtiberian, place names across the peninsula tell another story. Rivers like the Tagus, Tajo, and the Duero, towns such as Segovia or Zaragoza, carry names with Celtic roots. Toponymy, the study of place names, reveals linguistic layers beneath the modern landscape, pointing to centuries when Celtic languages shaped how people understood their land. Yet, the linguistic map of Iberia is far from uniform. Along the Mediterranean coast and in southern regions, the Iberian language, a non-Indo-European tongue, dominates the inscriptional record, underscoring the peninsula's complex mosaic of languages and cultures. In the northwest, the linguistic evidence is more fragmentary but still suggestive of Celtic or related Indo-European speech. This patchwork reveals that language shift was uneven. In some regions, Celtic speech took firm root, influencing local culture and politics. In others, it coexisted with, or was eventually replaced by, other languages. The interplay between language and identity was dynamic, shaped by migration, trade, conquest, and daily life. The stones of Celtiberia, then, do more than mark names or laws. They preserve echoes of conversations once spoken in marketplaces, councils, and hearths. Through them, we hear the voices of Celtic Iberians, their laws, their names, and their presence, inscribed against the passage of time. The question of how Celtic culture came to Iberia remains one of the most debated chapters in ancient history. Was it the result of waves of migration from Central Europe, the slow diffusion of ideas and objects, or a complex process of cultural blending? Scholars have wrestled with these competing models for decades, each offering a different lens through which to understand the origins of the Celtic Iberians. The first model, mass migration, envisions large groups of Celtic-speaking peoples crossing mountain ranges and rivers, bringing with them new languages, customs, and technologies. Supporters point to similarities in Latene-style metalwork, weaponry, and hillfort designs found both in Central Europe and Iberia. Classical sources, too, speak of Celtic tribes moving westward, which seems to align with this vision of demographic change. Under this model, the Iberian Celts would be newcomers, settling and shaping the landscape alongside or sometimes replacing indigenous peoples. In contrast, the elite dominance or small-scale migration model suggests a subtler process. Instead of vast population movements, small groups of warrior elites or artisan families might have migrated into Iberia, influencing local societies by introducing new styles, military practices, and social institutions. These elites, often associated with prestige goods like torques and swords, could have played outsized roles in shaping cultural change without large-scale demographic upheaval. Their presence might have encouraged local populations to adopt Celtic languages and customs, especially in areas of political complexity such as Celtiberia. The third model, cultural diffusion and acculturation, emphasizes the spread of ideas, motifs, and technologies through trade networks, alliances, and imitation rather than direct population movement. In this scenario, indigenous Iberian communities selectively incorporated elements of Latin art and Celtic material culture, adapting them to fit local traditions and needs. Language shifts, if they occurred, might have been gradual and uneven, reflecting social prestige or political alliances rather than wholesale ethnic change. Today, many scholars argue for a mosaic model that combines these perspectives. Iberia was not a passive recipient of Celtic culture, but an active participant in a web of exchanges, where migration, elite influence, and diffusion intertwined. Different regions likely experienced these processes in varied ways. The Ebro Valley, with its Celtic language inscriptions, may reflect deeper linguistic integration, while the Northwest's Castro culture reveals a blend of local tradition and imported style. This nuanced understanding reminds us that cultural identities in the ancient world were fluid, dynamic, and negotiated. The Celtic Iberians were not simply migrants or imitators. They were creators of hybrid cultures shaped by movement, contact, and adaptation. In the ancient world, cultures did not develop in isolation. The story of the Celtic Iberians is deeply entwined with the vast networks of trade, exchange, and communication that crisscross the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. Objects, ideas, and artistic styles flowed along these routes, connecting distant communities and shaping identities in surprising ways. The Iberian Peninsula's position at the crossroads of the Mediterranean and Atlantic worlds made it a natural hub for commercial interaction. Coastal ports and river valleys served as gateways where traders from Phoenicia, Greece, and later Rome mingled with local peoples, exchanging not only goods but also knowledge and cultural practices. Luxury goods such as amber from the Baltic, tin from Cornwall, and silver from Iberian mines moved along these routes, fueling demand for skilled craftsmanship and inspiring new forms of artistic expression. The ornate torques and fibulae found in Iberian hill forts demonstrate influences from the broader Celtic world, while also reflecting local tastes and resources. Beyond material goods, styles traveled as symbols of power and identity. Latin art motifs, for example, were not merely decorative. They carried meanings associated with prestige, warrior status, and connection to wider cultural spheres. By adopting and adapting these styles, Iberian elites could signal their participation in continental networks and assert their status within local hierarchies. Archaeological evidence also points to exchange networks extending deep into the peninsula's interior. Trade routes linked upland Castro communities with Mediterranean settlements, facilitating the flow of metals, ceramics, and textiles. These connections helped integrate diverse groups, creating shared cultural elements while preserving regional distinctiveness. Furthermore, the mobility of craftsmen and mercenaries contributed to the diffusion of technologies and artistic styles. Skilled metalworkers, moving between workshops and courts, introduced new techniques and designs that blended Celtic and Iberian traditions. Likewise, warrior mercenaries served not only as soldiers but also as cultural ambassadors, carrying language, customs, and material culture across borders. Thus, the Celtic Iberian world emerges as a vibrant tapestry woven from local innovation and external influence. Trade and networks were the channels through which styles traveled, not passively copied, but actively reinterpreted, shaping a distinctive cultural landscape that bridged the Atlantic and Mediterranean, the local and the continental. One of the most revealing windows into any ancient culture lies in how it honors its dead. Funerary practices are not simply rituals for the departed, they are expressions of belief, identity, and social order. In the case of the Celtic Iberians, burial customs illuminate a world where community, status, and spirituality intertwined in complex ways. Across the Iberian landscape, archaeological excavations have uncovered a variety of burial types, from simple inhumations to elaborate tombs filled with grave goods. These differences often reflect social hierarchies and regional traditions, painting a picture of diverse but interconnected societies. In the northwestern Castro culture, burials frequently occurred in necropolises near the settlements, with bodies placed in stone cists or simple pits. Grave goods included personal items such as pottery, iron weapons, and jewelry, torques, bracelets, and fibulae, suggesting the individual's social standing or role within the community. The presence of weapons in graves points to the importance of warrior status, while finely crafted ornaments imply connections to wealth and prestige. Moving eastward to the Celtiberian heartland, burial practices become even more varied and monumental. Here, archaeologists have uncovered tumulus mounds, stone-lined chamber tombs, and cremation sites. Some burials contained richly decorated weapons and imported luxury items, signaling elite individuals who wielded both martial and political power. The variety and richness of these tombs reflect a stratified society where kinship, rank, and perhaps tribal affiliations shaped life and death. The placement of burials within or near fortified settlements also suggests a close relationship between the living and the dead, indicating ancestors' continuing role in social cohesion and territorial claims. Funerary monuments, such as sculpted stone stelae engraved with symbols or inscriptions, served as enduring markers of identity and memory. Beyond the material, funerary customs reveal beliefs about the afterlife and spirituality. The diversity of cremation and inhumation practices, sometimes coexisting in the same region, points to complex ritual systems that may have varied between communities or changed over time. Offerings of weapons, food vessels, and personal belongings signal notions of provision for the journey beyond death, or the continued influence of the deceased. Social structures within Celtic Iberian societies appear to have been organized around kin groups, warrior elites, and craft specialists. Leadership roles may have been both inherited and earned, with power exercised through a combination of military prowess, control of resources, and religious authority. The story of the Celtic Iberians cannot be fully told without considering the profound influence of Mediterranean civilizations, particularly the Phoenicians and Greeks, who introduced new ways of life, trade, and urban organization to the Iberian Peninsula. These interactions helped reshape local cultures, accelerating social complexity and linking Iberia to the wider ancient world. From around the 9th century BCE, Phoenician traders and settlers established coastal outposts along the southern and eastern shores of Iberia. Their cities like Gadir, modern Cadiz, and Malacca, Malaga, became vibrant hubs of commerce and cultural exchange. The Phoenicians brought with them not only goods, luxury items, metals, and textiles, but also innovations in writing, religion, and urban planning. Their influence is evident in the emergence of early urban centers in Iberia, marked by planned streets, public spaces, and fortified walls. These nascent cities provided new social and economic opportunities for indigenous populations, including the Celtic-speaking communities inland, who engaged in trade and cultural dialogue with their Mediterranean neighbors. Following the Phoenicians, Greek colonists established settlements on the northeastern coast, such as Emporion, modern Empuris, further expanding the peninsula's Mediterranean connections. The Greeks introduced their own customs, art styles, and political ideas, contributing to the growing complexity of Iberian society. The diffusion of the urban model, characterized by centralized administration, craft specialization, and social stratification, had profound implications. It provided a framework within which Celtic Iberian communities could organize themselves politically and economically, especially in regions like Celtiberia, where oppida, fortified towns, thrived. Mediterranean contact also influenced religious practices and iconography. Imported deities and ritual forms merged with local beliefs, creating syncretic spiritual landscapes. Artistic motifs from Phoenician and Greek art found expression in Iberian metalwork and ceramics, reflecting the fusion of traditions. Yet, despite these influences, Celtic Iberians maintained distinctive cultural traits. Their hillforts and oppida were not mere copies of Mediterranean cities, but adapted urban forms, blending external ideas with local needs and customs. This hybridization testifies to Iberia's role not as a passive recipient, but as an active participant in Mediterranean dynamics. Thus, the Mediterranean world was both a source of inspiration and a catalyst for transformation. It helped shape the social and economic fabric of Celtic Iberian societies, connecting them to broader currents of ancient history while preserving their unique identities at the edge of Europe. As the Roman Republic expanded its reach into the Iberian Peninsula from the 3rd century BCE onwards, the Celtic Iberians found themselves at a pivotal crossroads. Caught between survival, resistance, and adaptation in the shadow of a new imperial power. The centuries of Roman conquest were marked by fierce struggles. The Celtiberian Wars, 181 to 133 BCE, stand as a testament to the determination of Celtic Iberian tribes to defend their lands and autonomy. From the rugged hill forts of Numantia to the battlefields of the Ebro Valley, warriors fought with fierce resolve, employing guerrilla tactics and intimate knowledge of their terrain against the disciplined legions. The long siege of Numantia, immortalized in Roman history, symbolizes both the resilience and tragedy of these communities as they resisted subjugation. Yet resistance was only one thread in a complex tapestry of interactions. Many Celtic Iberian leaders negotiated alliances with Rome, seeking to protect their people and preserve some degree of local power. Roman diplomacy often played tribal factions against one another, rewarding those who accepted Roman terms with land, citizenship, and status. Such alliances created a web of cooperation that accelerated cultural and political change. The Roman presence introduced new institutions, laws, and infrastructure, roads, towns, and administrative centers that reshaped the Iberian landscape. Over time, Romanization altered language, economy, and social structures. Latin gradually supplanted Celtic languages, and Roman religious practices blended with or supplanted native beliefs. Yet even as Roman influence deepened, echoes of Celtic Iberian identity endured. Local elites adopted Roman customs selectively, maintaining traditional symbols of power alongside new ones. Archaeological finds reveal a hybrid culture where Celtic-style jewelry coexisted with Roman pottery, and native religious iconography mingled with imperial motifs. The Roman shadow did not simply erase the Celtic Iberians. Instead, it transformed them. The legacy of resistance, alliance, and cultural blending laid the foundations for the complex identity of Hispania in the centuries to come. In this final chapter of the ancient Celtic Iberian story, we see not an abrupt end, but a profound transformation. A testament to the enduring spirit of a people whose origins remain enigmatic yet undeniably woven into the fabric of European history. In recent years, a powerful new tool has entered the quest to understand the origins of the Celtic Iberians: paleogenomics, the study of ancient DNA extracted from skeletal remains. This revolutionary science offers tantalizing glimpses into the biological heritage of past populations, promising to clarify questions about migration, continuity, and ancestry that traditional archaeology and linguistics alone cannot fully resolve. Studies analyzing ancient DNA from Iberian burial sites have begun to reveal patterns of genetic continuity alongside evidence of movement and admixture. Some findings suggest that rather than wholesale population replacement, there was significant local continuity from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, punctuated by limited gene flow from outside regions. This supports models of cultural diffusion and elite migration rather than mass invasions. However, paleogenomics must be approached with caution. Genetic data can tell us about ancestry and biological relationships, but cannot, by itself, define culture, language, or identity, concepts that are fluid, socially constructed, and lived in complex ways. The people who spoke Celtic languages in Iberia were not necessarily genetically Celtic in a simple sense, nor were they isolated from neighboring groups. Furthermore, the fragmentary nature of the genetic record means interpretations are provisional and evolving. Sampling bias, preservation conditions, and the limited number of analyzed individuals constrain our ability to draw sweeping conclusions. The story genetics tells must be woven carefully into the broader tapestry of archaeology, linguistics, and history. In this light, paleogenomics offers a complementary window, a powerful but partial perspective that enriches our understanding without replacing traditional evidence. It reminds us that identity is a multidimensional phenomenon, shaped by genes, culture, language, and human experience. The emerging genetic picture of the Celtic Iberians is one of complexity and nuance, mirroring the archaeological and linguistic evidence. As technology advances and more data become available, this window will open wider, offering deeper insights into the enigmatic origins of these ancient peoples, but always with the caveat that the past is a mosaic, never a single clear image. To truly grasp the diversity and complexity of the Celtic Iberians, we turn to three distinct regions: Galicia, Lusitania, and Celtiberia, each offering unique insights into how Celtic culture was expressed, adapted, and lived across the Iberian Peninsula. In the rugged northwest corner of Iberia, Galicia presents one of the most enduring expressions of Celtic Iberian identity. Here, the Castro culture flourished, characterized by its distinctive hillfort settlements perched atop craggy hills and promontories overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. These communities lived in relative isolation, their lives shaped by the rugged landscape and maritime climate. Archaeological finds from Galicia reveal a rich tradition of metalworking and craftsmanship, with torques, fibulae, and weapons fashioned in styles bearing clear Celtic influences, yet imbued with local motifs. The use of Latin-inspired designs suggests strong cultural ties with wider Atlantic and continental networks. Linguistically, Galicia's Celtic heritage is supported by place names and historical accounts that connect the region's peoples to the broader Celtic world. The persistence of Celtic customs, folklore, and even linguistic traces in later centuries has led some to see Galicia as a cultural stronghold of Celtic identity within Iberia. Stretching across much of modern-day Portugal and parts of western Spain, Lusitania represents a crossroads of Iberian, Celtic, and Mediterranean influences. The region's archaeological record reflects a blend of indigenous traditions and external contacts, including Phoenician and later Roman. Lusitanian society was organized into tribal groups, known for their fierce independence and skilled guerrilla warfare, famously resisting Roman conquest under leaders like Viriathus. Their material culture features a mix of Celtic-style weaponry and locally produced ceramics and jewelry. Although the Lusitanian language remains only partially understood, many scholars argue it belonged to the Celtic family or was at least heavily influenced by it. This linguistic ambiguity reflects Lusitania's position as a frontier zone where cultural identities overlapped and mingled. At the core of the Iberian Peninsula lies Celtiberia, a region around the upper Ebro Valley known for its fortified oppida, rich archaeological sites, and abundant inscriptions in the Celtiberian language. This area is often considered the heartland of Celtic culture in Iberia. Celtiberian settlements exhibit sophisticated urban planning, fortified walls, and evidence of craft specialization. Warrior elites are well documented through richly furnished tombs, reflecting a society with clear social hierarchies and martial values. The Celtic Iberians inhabited a world rich with spiritual meaning and artistic expression, realms where the sacred and the everyday intertwined, and where visual symbols conveyed complex ideas about identity, power, and the cosmos. Understanding their religion and art opens a window into how these ancient peoples imagined themselves and their place in the world. Religious life among the Celtic Iberians was closely tied to the natural world. Sacred groves, springs, and mountain peaks served as focal points for worship and ritual, reflecting a deep reverence for the landscape. Archaeological evidence of ritual deposits, offerings of weapons, pottery, and animal bones, found in rivers, caves, and hill forts, suggests practices aimed at communicating with deities or ancestral spirits. While direct evidence of Celtic Iberian deities is limited, classical sources mention gods associated with war, fertility, and the natural world. Many scholars see parallels between Iberian religious practices and those of continental Celtic peoples, including the veneration of sky gods, earth goddesses, and chthonic spirits. Art was not mere decoration, but a language of symbols and identity. Latin-style motifs, swirling spirals, stylized animals, and intricate knotwork appear across metalwork, stone carvings, and ceramics. However, in Iberia, these designs were transformed by local aesthetics, resulting in unique hybrids that blend continental styles with indigenous traditions. Jewelry such as torques and bracelets served both as personal adornment and markers of status and affiliation. Weapons bore intricate decorations that communicated the owner's power and connection to warrior ideals. Stone stelae and sculptures often bore symbolic carvings that may have served ritual or commemorative purposes. Religion and art were deeply intertwined with social structures. Ritual ceremonies reinforced group cohesion and hierarchical relationships, while art articulated communal values and myths. The visual and symbolic language of the Celtic Iberians expressed not only personal identity, but also collective memory and political authority. In times of conflict or change, these cultural expressions provided continuity, grounding communities in shared traditions, even as they adapted to new influences. They remind us that identity in the ancient world was dynamic, shaped as much by imagination and belief as by material culture and language. In tracing the enigmatic origins of the Celtic Iberians, it is easy to become lost in categories: Celts, Iberians, migrants, locals, artifacts, and languages. Yet behind these labels lie real people. Men, women, and children who lived, loved, struggled, and shaped the world they inherited. Archaeology and history offer us fragments, shards of pottery, weathered stones, inscribed bronzes. But it is our imagination and empathy that breathe life into these remnants. Each torque worn on a warrior's neck, each fortified hilltop home, and each carved inscription carries the silent stories of individual lives, communities, and relationships. The Celtic Iberians were not a monolithic group defined solely by language or material culture. They were dynamic, diverse, and adaptable peoples who navigated shifting landscapes of power, trade, and identity. They forged alliances, resisted conquerors, embraced new ideas, and preserved ancient traditions, all while living in a land marked by rugged mountains, winding rivers, and wild coastlines. Their story reminds us that identity is not static or simple. It is a mosaic, formed through interaction, change, and continuity. The Celtic Iberians inhabited a world as complex and nuanced as our own, where culture was lived experience, not just an academic category. As we uncover their past, we are invited not just to label or categorize, but to listen, to imagine the voices behind the artifacts, the faces behind the stelae, and the lives behind the history. In doing so, we transform enigmatic origins into human stories, connecting the ancient Celtic Iberians to the living tapestry of Europe's cultural heritage. The legacy of the Celtic Iberians extends far beyond ancient hill forts and archaeological finds. Today, their heritage lives on in the landscapes, languages, and cultural identities of the Iberian Peninsula, and in the broader Celtic imagination that stretches across Europe and the world. In regions like Galicia and northern Portugal, echoes of Celtic culture resonate in folk music, traditional festivals, and even local legends. The melodies of bagpipes, known as the gaita, fill mountain valleys, recalling an ancient musical heritage that many trace back to Celtic roots. Annual celebrations celebrate ancestral customs, blending pagan echoes with Christian traditions, illustrating the continuity and transformation of cultural identity. The names of rivers, towns, and mountains retain their Celtic origins, anchoring modern communities to a distant past. This linguistic heritage shapes regional pride and identity, fostering a sense of belonging that reaches deep into history. Beyond Iberia, the image of the Celt has become a powerful symbol in art, literature, and popular culture. From medieval romances to contemporary fantasy, the Celtic world inspires stories of bravery, mysticism, and connection to nature. While these modern imaginings often romanticize or mythologize the past, they also keep alive the spirit of a people whose true histories are complex, diverse, and fascinating. Scholars and enthusiasts alike continue to explore and reinterpret the Celtic Iberian story, blending science, archaeology, and storytelling. Museums, cultural centers, and educational programs work to bring these ancient cultures into the public eye, fostering appreciation and understanding. In embracing their Celtic heritage, modern communities in Iberia and beyond engage in a dialogue with the past, one that honors the mystery and richness of their ancestors, while weaving their stories into the ever-evolving fabric of cultural identity. As we draw our exploration to a close, one truth stands clear. The origins of the Celtic Iberians resist simple explanations. They are not the product of a single migration wave, nor are they easily defined by a single language, artifact, or legend. Instead, their story is a rich mosaic, composed of movements, exchanges, adaptations, and enduring local traditions. The Celtic Iberians emerged from centuries of interaction between indigenous peoples and newcomers, shaped by trade, warfare, alliances, and cultural diffusion. Their identities were layered and fluid, reflecting the complexities of ancient life in a land at the crossroads of Atlantic and Mediterranean worlds. Archaeological evidence, from hill forts and oppida to exquisite metalwork, reveals communities both rooted in place and connected across distances. Linguistic traces preserved in inscriptions and place names demonstrate that Celtic languages took deep root, yet coexisted with other tongues in a vibrant linguistic landscape. Classical writers provided glimpses filtered through their own cultural lenses, capturing only part of the story. Modern genetics offers promising clues but underscores the complexity of ancestry, reminding us that identity is never reducible to biology alone. Ultimately, the Celtic Iberians invite us to move beyond rigid categories and simplistic narratives. They challenge us to embrace complexity, to see culture as a living, evolving process, a tapestry woven from countless threads of human experience. Their enigmatic origins remain partly veiled, a mystery that fuels our curiosity and inspires ongoing discovery. But through the fragments of their past, we glimpse a people whose legacy endures in the landscapes, languages, and imaginations of today. The Celtic Iberians, then, are not just a chapter in history. They are a testament to the enduring power of cultural diversity, resilience, and connection.